had always believed that the stories my Lola told me were nothing more than myths, folklore passed down to scare children into obedience. But here I was, thousands of miles from my childhood home in the Philippines, waking up to a shiver that ran deeper than the cold of an American winter. The darkness in my apartment felt alive, charged with a silent whisper that curled around my spine. It was just past midnight, and the moon hung low in the sky like a watchful eye. I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, even in the privacy of my room. The air felt thicker, almost suffocating. My heart began to race as the shadows in the corner of my room seemed to shift, forming shapes too sinister to be mere tricks of the light. "Come back to us," a voice hissed, barely a whisper, but clear in the silent room. The words slithered under my skin, leaving trails of ice. I sat up, clutching the blanket to my chest. The room was empty, yet I felt an overwhelming presence. Was I losing my mind? This couldn't be real. Visions of the Aswang, the vampiric creature from the stories Lola told, flashed before my eyes. She had spoken of its shape-shifting abilities, how it preyed on the unwary at night, savoring the blood of the living. I had laughed it off back then, a child who knew no fear. But now, the laughter was caught in my throat, strangled by fear. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, my hands trembling. The light flickered on, casting long shadows across the room that danced like specters fleeing the intrusion. The relief that flooded me was palpable, though it did nothing to calm the pounding in my chest. "You can't hide from what's inside," the voice taunted, closer this time. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I spun around, expecting to confront an intruder, but there was nothing. My eyes darted frantically, searching for the source of the voice that plagued me. The air grew colder, a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself, my eyes never leaving the darkest corner of the room. That's when I saw it. A figure, dark and amorphous, shifting in the shadows. I blinked, and it was gone. Was I imagining things? My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. The nights that followed were plagued with nightmares. I saw faces twisted in agony, heard cries that echoed through my dreams. Each morning I awoke, feeling less like myself, drained and hollow. The boundaries between sleep and wakefulness blurred until I could no longer trust my senses. I decided to seek help, consulting experts who delved into the supernatural. They spoke of curses and ancient spirits, of battles between good and evil that spanned generations. But none could offer a solution. I was told to return to my homeland to seek answers where the story began. Reluctantly, I booked a flight back to the Philippines. The journey was long, and with each mile that passed beneath the wings of the plane, the sense of impending doom grew. What was waiting for me there? Was I walking into a trap laid by the very creature that haunted my dreams? Landing in Manila was like stepping into another world. The air was heavy with humidity, the streets alive with the sounds of daily hustle. But beneath the surface, there was a tension that I could feel, a warning whispered by the wind. I traveled to the province where my Lola once lived, a remote area where the modern world seemed to have forgotten to touch. The locals were friendly but reserved, their eyes flickering with recognition and something else, fear, perhaps, or pity. I reached the old house by sunset, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. The house looked exactly as I remembered, though more dilapidated. As I approached, the air grew cooler, the earlier heat of the day retreating as if afraid of what the night might bring. That night, as I lay in the room I once shared with my cousins, the whispers returned. "You've come back," they hissed, a chorus of voices that seemed to mock my fear. "But you're too late, too late." The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching towards me with grasping hands. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake from. The dark figure appeared again, its form more defined, almost human, but twisted, wrong. It leaned close, so close I could feel the chill of its breath. "You cannot escape what's in your blood," it whispered, its voice a cacophony of every fear I'd ever had. "You are one of us, child of the night." I struggled to respond, to deny the creature's claim, but no words came. The room spun, the shadows merging into a vortex that threatened to swallow me whole. Just as I felt I would be lost forever, a sharp knock at the door shattered the illusion. The room snapped back to normal, the figure gone as if it had never been. I gasped for air, my body drenched in sweat. "Who is it?" I managed to call, my voice shaking. "It's time to learn the truth," the reply came, not from the other side of the door, but from within my own mind. The voice was different, not the haunting whisper of the Aswang, but something older, more powerful. I knew then that my journey was far from over. Whatever secrets lay buried in my family's past, I was about to uncover them. But at what cost? The door creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but the dark corridor beyond. I stepped forward, not knowing what I would find, but unable to stay back. The story was just beginning, and I was already in too deep to turn back now. I stepped through the doorway, the wood creaking ominously beneath my feet. The air was thick with the scent of mold and something else, something sinister that I couldn't quite identify. The corridor stretched before me, lit only by the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. As I walked, the walls seemed to pulse, as if breathing. Whispers filled the air, a cacophony of voices that were neither fully human nor completely otherworldly. "Do you feel it?" they asked, their tones mocking. "The pull of your own blood?" I tried to ignore them, focusing on the path ahead. But it was difficult. The voices seemed to claw at the edges of my mind, seeking entrance. I felt a chill run down my spine as I passed a mirror, the reflection showing a figure standing right behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway and the echo of my own ragged breathing. The further I walked, the more intense the sensations became. The air grew colder, and my breath misted in the moonlight. Shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human. One shadow detached itself from the wall, its form hazy and indistinct. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat as the figure approached. It was a woman, or something that once might have been a woman. Her features were blurred, her eyes hollow pits that seemed to stare right through me. "Lost?" she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the still air. So lost. I felt a pang of sympathy, despite the terror that gripped me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The apparition paused, tilting her head as if struggling to remember. "I was like you," she said finally, her voice a sorrowful moan. "Seeking answers. But there are things in this world better left undiscovered." Before I could respond, she vanished, dissipating into the air like smoke. I was left alone once more, with only the whispers for company. They seemed louder now, more insistent. "Turn back," they urged. "Leave this place." But I couldn't turn back. Not now. I needed to know the truth, no matter how dark or dreadful it might be. The hallway ended at a large wooden door, its surface carved with strange symbols that seemed to writhe under my gaze. I reached out a trembling hand and pushed the door open. It swung inward with a groan, revealing a room that was completely unlike any other part of the house. It was a library, the walls lined with shelves filled with ancient tomes and dusty scrolls. In the center of the room stood a desk, its surface cluttered with papers and strange artifacts. A single lamp cast a pool of light over the desk, illuminating the figure seated behind it. He was an old man, his hair white and his skin paper-thin. He looked up as I entered, his eyes sharp and calculating. "So, you've come," he said, his voice rasping. "Do you know what you are, child?" I shook my head, too overwhelmed to speak. The old man chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You are a descendant," he said, "of a powerful line. A line that has always walked the boundary between the human world and the supernatural. Why am I being haunted?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "Because they know what you are capable of," the old man replied, gesturing at the shadows that flickered in the corners of the room. "They fear you, as they should." He stood, moving to the shelves and retrieving a thick, leather-bound book. He offered it to me, his hands trembling. "This will explain everything," he said. "But be warned, knowledge comes at a cost." I took the book, feeling its weight in my hands. The cover was cold, the leather worn with age. I opened it to the first page, my eyes scanning the ancient script. The words seemed to lift off the page, whispering into my ear in 1,000 different voices. The room spun, the shadows deepening. I could hear them moving now, skittering across the walls, whispering promises of power and threats of doom. The old man's voice was a distant echo: "Read, learn, and prepare. They will come for you, as they came for those before you." I clutched the book to my chest, my mind reeling. What had I gotten myself into? What horrors lay in wait in the pages of this ancient tome? The shadows grew denser, and I sensed rather than saw the figures that began to emerge from them. They were the lost and the damned, souls trapped between worlds, bound to the Aswang's curse. They circled around me, their whispers growing louder, more demanding. "You belong to us," they hissed, their voices overlapping. "Join us, embrace your destiny." I backed away, my heart pounding. I was not ready to succumb to the darkness, not without a fight. But as I looked around the room, surrounded by the encroaching shadows, I wondered if I had any choice at all. The book seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its secrets eager to be known. With a trembling hand, I turned the page, stepping deeper into the mystery of my own bloodline, into the heart of darkness itself. The story was far from over, and the night was only just beginning. As I stood, surrounded by the encroaching darkness, the whispers intensified, each syllable like a needle to my skin. "Blood of our blood," they chanted, a litany that seemed both a welcome and a warning. The figures circled closer, their forms more discernible now, faces of anguish and despair, eyes hollow with longing and loss. I flipped through the ancient tome, desperate for something, anything, that might aid me. The pages whispered under my fingers, each turn releasing whispers of arcane knowledge. Images of rituals, diagrams of celestial alignments, and incantations written in a language that twisted the tongue. The weight of my heritage, of my very blood, pressed down upon me with a suffocating force. Suddenly, the air shifted, charged with an electricity that raised the hairs on my arms. A shadow darker than the rest formed before me, growing in stature and clarity until it stood as a figure robed in the blackest night. It reached out, a hand that might once have been human but was now something else, something twisted and dark. "Why do you resist?" it hissed, its voice a cascade of chills down my spine. "You belong to this world, not to the light." "I don't belong to you," I retorted, my voice steadier than I felt. "I will find another way." The figure laughed, a sound like the crackling of fire. "There is no other way. You will see in time. All come to embrace their darkness." In a swift motion, it reached out and touched my forehead. I expected pain, but instead, a flood of visions assaulted me, generations of my ancestors, some embracing the dark, others fighting it, all bound by the curse of their lineage. My head throbbed with the influx of knowledge, the weight of ages pressing into my very soul. The apparition withdrew, and the pressure eased slightly, allowing me to breathe. "Learn from them," it whispered, fading back into the shadows from which it had emerged. Armed with the reluctant guidance from the figure and the cryptic information in the book, I knew I had to delve deeper into the legacy of the Aswang to find my salvation or damnation. Each page I turned unraveled more of the complex tapestry of curses and power that had defined my ancestors' lives. As dawn approached, the whispers faded, leaving behind a heavy silence. The coming light seemed to fortify me, lending a clarity that the night had stolen. I needed allies, and I knew just where to start: the local elders, steeped in the lore that I had tried so hard to escape. The village was quiet as I approached, the first rays of the sun casting long shadows on the dirt roads. The elders were gathered in the dapai, a communal space where matters of great importance were discussed. They looked up as I approached, their faces etched with lines of wisdom and worry. "I seek your guidance," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the open air. "The shadows of my past have come calling, and I must answer." One of the elders, an old woman with eyes like polished coal, nodded slowly. "We have been expecting you," she said, her voice a whisper of leaves. "The Aswang does not forget its own, nor does it release them easily." They invited me to sit, and together we pored over the book I had brought, their knowledge filling the gaps in my understanding. They spoke of rituals and protections, some so ancient they had been nearly forgotten by all but a few. "The key lies in your blood," the elder woman said, tapping a gnarled finger on a particularly cryptic passage in the book. "But blood can bind or banish, the choice is yours." Armed with new knowledge and a fragile hope, I prepared for the coming night, when the shadows would no longer whisper but roar. The elders provided me with talismans and wards, objects imbued with the light of old magic, strong enough, they hoped, to protect me from the darker urges of my heritage. As the sun set, casting the world once again into shadows, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The night would be long, and the battle fierce, but I was no longer unarmed. The whispers began again as darkness fell, but this time I was ready to face them, to confront the legacy of the Aswang head-on. "Come then," I whispered into the growing dark, my voice steady. "Let us end this." The shadows twisted and turned, forming shapes that were both terrifying and familiar. I stood my ground, the talismans glowing softly around me, a barrier of light against the dark. The story of the Aswang, my story, was far from over, but as I faced the darkness with a newfound resolve, I knew that whatever the outcome, it would not be the end. This was but another chapter in a saga that spanned generations, a tale of curses, conflict, and perhaps eventual redemption. But the night was deep, and the shadows were gathering. The final confrontation was at hand, and the fate of my soul hung in the balance. The stage was set, and the players were ready. The next move was mine, and it would determine everything. The journey into the heart of darkness continued, deeper and more perilous than ever before. The night was suffocatingly dark, as if the very air was steeped in shadow. The moon, a mere sliver in the sky, cast weak light that seemed almost devoured by the enveloping blackness. I stood in the center of a clearing, the ancient talismans from the elders clasped tightly in my hand. They pulsed with a warm light, a stark contrast to the creeping cold around me. As the hour drew near, the air thickened with the whispers of the past, a cacophony of voices that belonged to those ensnared by the curse of the Aswang. The ground beneath my feet trembled slightly, as if the earth itself was wary of the horrors that the night might unleash. Child of darkness and light, a voice boomed from the shadows, more felt than heard. The time has come to choose. From the surrounding darkness, figures began to emerge. They were the Aswang of old, creatures of nightmare, their eyes glowing with malevolence. They encircled me, their forms fluid and shifting, mouths agape to reveal rows of sharp, menacing teeth. I tightened my grip on the talismans, feeling the ancient magic thrum through my veins. I choose neither darkness nor light alone, I declared, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. I choose a new path, one that neither you nor my ancestors have trodden. The lead Aswang, its form larger and more terrifying than the others, stepped forward. You defy the very nature of your blood, it hissed, its voice like the scrape of bone on stone. You cannot carve a path that does not exist. Watch me, I replied, raising the talismans. The symbols etched into their surfaces began to glow brighter, casting beams of light that pierced the surrounding gloom. The Aswang recoiled as the light touched them, their forms momentarily writhing in agony. They were creatures of shadow, and the pure, unbridled light was anathema to them. Using the momentary respite, I began to chant the incantations the elders had taught me. The words were ancient, powerful, and as I spoke them, the air vibrated with the force of my will. The ground shook, the wind howled, and the very fabric of the night seemed to tear. The Aswang shrieked, their voices melding into a cacophony of terror and pain. The lead creature advanced, its face contorting into a mask of rage. You cannot destroy us, it screamed. We are eternal. Not anymore, I shouted, my voice amplifying with the power of the ancient magic. The final words of the incantation left my lips, and I thrust the talismans forward, channeling all my will into the destruction of the curse that had plagued my family for generations. A blinding light erupted from the talismans, enveloping everything. The Aswang's screams were cut short as the light consumed them, their forms disintegrating into ash that was swept away by the wind. As the light faded, I found myself alone in the clearing. The oppressive weight of the night was gone, replaced by a new quiet, a peaceful silence that felt like a benediction. The curse was broken, the Aswang destroyed. My family was free from the shadows that had haunted us. I collapsed to my knees, overwhelmed by the ordeal, but grateful for its end. The talismans, now dark and inert, slipped from my limp fingers to the soft earth below. Dawn was approaching, the first hints of light painting the horizon with hues of pink and orange. As the sun rose, its light seemed to cleanse the world anew. I stood, my body weary, but my spirit invigorated by the victory. The battle was over, the darkness vanquished, and a new day dawned. I walked back to the village, the sun warming my back, and knew that I would tell this tale to those who would listen. The tale of how the curse was broken, how the Aswang were defeated, and how a path neither of light nor of darkness was forged by one who dared to defy their destiny. And as the village came into view, the people emerging from their homes to greet the new day, I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I looked forward to the future, to the peace that awaited us all. The story of the Aswang was over, and it would haunt us no more.